Now I'll start by saying this isn't an Ange Postecoglou hate video. In fact, I'm a Celtic fan, so I quite like the guy. But the more I watch Tottenham, the more I see problems and something needs to change. Whereas the biggest problem is, I don't think it will change. I think it's fair to say that Tottenham fans can turn on their managers a little bit too soon, and the problem that brings is it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point, where the more negativity you bring, the more pressure they're put under. And what I see when we look at Ange Postecoglou is this constant, he's never managed at a top level before and he's out of his depth. And for me, that isn't actually the problem here. We've seen him have success all around the globe with different teams, different strength of teams, and usually in that second season, something just clicks. You know, he gets a team playing to their best degree. And I still think that can happen with Tottenham this year. The big thing that needs to change is the most obvious thing. It's changing his tactics. Every single game he's gonna go out and play the same tactics. I know that better than anyone being a Celtic fan, because when we go to Real Madrid away and we play the same tactics that we play against Ross County at home, of course it's gonna fall apart. We ended up losing that game 5-1, and I could name countless other games where the same thing happened, if not worse. And playing in the Premier League, it's truly humbling. Already this season, we've seen it happen twice. Brighton, 2 goals up and lose. Chelsea, today, 2 goals up and lose. And the worst part is, from a Tottenham perspective, you could see it coming. You know, the game is so open to the point that you almost expect it at this point, especially when there are some key injuries. And at the same time, the answer isn't to get a completely new philosophy of football. I appreciate Ange Postecoglou's perspective, where it's working, it's worked for his whole career, it got him to where he is now. But at the same time, any manager across the world of football would say to you, you shouldn't play the same tactics if you're 4-0 up or 4-0 down. They should change based on your, scenario at hand. And that's the problem that I don't see him changing. When he goes 2 or 3-0 up, it's not a defensive approach, it's exactly the same thing. This evolution of tactics is what separates good managers from the great managers. Look at Jose Mourinho, his Porto Chelsea teams playing that solid defensive 4-2-3-1. If he tried and played that at Real Madrid when he had Cristiano Ronaldo in his absolute prime, he wouldn't have had nearly as much success as he did. In the Premier League, Mourinho's Chelsea team broke the record for the least goals conceded at 15. Compare that to his time at Real Madrid, where his team broke the attacking record in La Liga, 121 goals. That's the sort of change we need to see from Ange Postecoglou's teams. They are fantastic at that high line attacking football. But at times you need to understand and change tactics where it's completely necessary. And at the end of the day, that completely comes down to the manager's characteristics. Now unfortunately, Ange Postecoglou does seem like that stubborn type that won't change his mind or his opinion. But at the end of the day, the more evidence you get of it, surely it's your time to change. At the same time, we need to look at both sides of the coin and give him a fair analysis, because Tottenham, under Ange Postecoglou this season, have been incredibly unlucky. You know, injury-wise, you look at Romero and Van de Ven and think, yeah, without them, they're really going to struggle. But at the same time, we've had Son out, we've had Solanke out, Vicario's out till about February time. These are all injuries that are seriously going to add up, and I know every club has injuries. I just don't think they've all come in the same sort of weakness of Spurs. Because at the same, perspective here, Spurs aren't set out to be a top 4 squad. I do think you could argue they're a top 4 team, but when you look at the reserves that come in, when Son's injured, Werner comes in. When Solanke's injured, you might get Richarlison, but he's also been injured, so you're looking to, these really young players. It is tough on Ange because he does have a really strong starting 11. But beyond that, I think you start to see a little bit more of where an injured team struggles. And we've seen those weakened teams show great success, like at Man City winning 4-0. That's just ridiculous. That shows the absolute quality he has. So, is the right answer to go and sack Ange Postecoglou? I don't think it is. Now I'll say I don't see him keeping his job. You know, today it looks like Romero and Van de Ven could be injured again, which means they're going to play ultra attacking. They'll get caught out by weaker teams, and eventually Levy's going to decide, look, I'm under too much pressure, you are gone. Unfortunately, a decision like that, in my opinion, would just keep Tottenham at that mediocrity, close but not close enough to get those sort of title dreams. Whereas on the other hand, Ange's style really takes advantage when they're the more dominant team, when they're expected to win, and when they can play their fluent attacking football. And I think in the Europa League, they have the chance to do exactly that. You know, being one of the favourites of the competition, you'll see more of that like Celtic dominance where they go out, smash teams consistently and build that confidence. So for me, I would stick with Ange. I truly think if they just assessed him at the end of the season, he'd probably have a Europa League campaign. Now that actually wouldn't guarantee him his job. You know, we saw with Erik ten Hag that a trophy's great, but at the end of the day, it's a Premier League. It's the money that comes with the Premier League that really dictates how they're going to do. So at this point, I wouldn't blame you if you are confused, because I'm saying Ange needs to change his style. He's not going to change his style, but he could have success in the Europa League, but that's not going to fall through to the Premier League, so he might not keep his job anyway. Well, at this point, we need to assess differently, because it's so clear that this problem stretches far beyond Ange Postecoglou or who's the Tottenham manager. Because just look at the previous managers. Jose Mourinho goes to Rome and wins their first trophy in 16 years. And I can go one step better. Antonio Conte goes to Napoli and wins their first Serie A in 32 years. I mean, how ironic is that? You're at a club that hasn't won a trophy for 16 years. You fire both the managers as, you know, the fans turn on them, the results weren't what they wanted. And then they go and break curses at different clubs and win it for them. I think at this point, if you are a Tottenham fan, and particularly if you do want Postecoglou to be sacked, you've got to assess what is success for Tottenham, what would you accept, and where do you want to be? Because I think a lot of Tottenham fans want a trophy and they want top four, but you look at their squad, you look at the weaknesses, particularly, you know, outside of the starting 11, and then you see it's not really possible. At some point, you could actually argue that Tottenham are in a bit of a rebuild phase where they're not going to go and push out and be, you know, top four. It's a bit like Man United where they just need to, you know, condense, have a bit of consistency, stick with a manager and see what he can do. Now, it might be a bit excessive to call Tottenham in a rebuild phase when they're only 11th in the Premier League, they're in the Carabao Cup, they're in the Europa League, but ultimately, when you consider they're not in this, you know, affluent position, they don't have, you know, it's not the season off the back of the Champions League final. They are a couple of seasons deep where they've just had mediocre, if not a little bit below average results. So if you accept that for a second and you say, right, we can't go and win everything this season. A trophy would be a great confidence builder. Beyond that, we need stability and a little bit of a rebuild. I don't think there's any managers available that would join Tottenham that would do a better job than Postecoglou. I again reflect back to Celtic, where we had just lost 10 in a row. We had one of our worst possible teams against one of Rangers' strongest teams that got into the Europa League. But in his very first season, he went and completely reversed that, winning the double. Then the next season, he went and won the treble, which I know from an outside perspective is like, yes, Celtic's been the most dominant team in the 21st century. But when you actually know the club and know what a bad position we were in, for him to rebuild it in that speed and then to move on and leave behind such a fantastic setup, I know Ange Postecoglou is the right person for the job. And like I said previously, all he needs to do is have a defensive strategy. Like, surely there's a defensive coach that can step in at some point at 2-0 up to Chelsea today, for example, and say, hey, we either need an extra defender or to push people back into a different formation, because all it is that. My only concern that comes with that is that, understandably, Tottenham fans are running out of patience. So we haven't really seen this charismatic, on everyone's side, everyone likes him. We haven't seen Ange Postecoglou on the other side of that for a long time, except for maybe when he was Australia national team manager. But that's a completely different situation to what he's in right now. So for me, if I was in charge of Tottenham, I would actually stick with Postecoglou. I'd try and get the fans on side. I'd add some more depth signings in the winter window. And besides that, look, you hope for the best in the Europa League or the Carabao Cup.